Good afternoon. How are you today? Well, it's a nice Friday, and it's a blistering 49 degrees, and it feels warm enough to dress too heavily. So that's our Thomas Jefferson weather report for the day. There's a lot going on. It's hard to pick out any single thing. Putin has shown his great liberality by allowing the mother of the protester he killed to see her son. He doesn't want there to be a public funeral because this close to his re-election against, I suppose, one other candidate who is not in jail is too much for Putin to bear. Now, going stateside, there are a couple of things that come to mind. Nikki Haley, who's always surfing and navigating between positions that she thinks will help her as opposed to those who hurt her. And in the best tradition of the worst politicians, in a single statement, she's going to be on both sides of the same issue. So a good example is the in vitro question out of Alabama, the in vitro fertilization. And that is by which an ovum has an opportunity to be merged with sperm, but isolated from the human body until such time as the fertilized egg can be implanted in either the woman who contributed the ova, because it's more than one, and the implantation is made in her or a host mother. And this concerns all sorts of institutions that are hemmed in by some who have superstitions and religious views that are not based in medical science. There's also adoption. And with the number of children we have in the world, if people want children and for one reason or other they've waited or met late, that's an excellent, loving choice to make, so that a child can have a life with someone who really wants a child to be present, as opposed to all the unwanted children that these crazy evangelical Christians want, presumably as cannon fodder, or soldiers of their version of Christ the Savior, who in the original did not believe in war and such metaphors, I suppose. Even when he was in the garden, knowing he was going to be come and taken away by Roman soldiers, and one came upon him, and Peter cut off the ear of one of the soldiers. Jesus stopped him from that violence and, according to the Testament, put the ear back on the soldier. How many evangelists have that concept of Christianity? Zero. Zero. Because they hate. They want to drive people out of the temple and all religions off the face of the earth that are not their own, which is why we see what we did through the history of Ireland when a king made a religion so he could wive a woman to put a male on the throne. And we have the Middle East, we see that on a daily basis, and on and on. And there are some who would have us bring a theocracy to America with that kind of thinking. Well, anyhow, Haley was for the opinion and before she was against the opinion, and she wants to do something about, preserving the right for people to have in vitro fertilization. Great. But what we're overlooking is what this is really about. This is a test case. And if we're not careful, it will be the case. And what is it a test case about? It's not a test case about whether the family can recover damages for the fact that fertilized eggs were lost by the accidental dropping by a patient of a too cold container that housed these fertilized eggs. What is it about? What it is about is redefining life so that women and men and nobody can get around the fact that even a fecundated ovum, a zygote, is considered a person, a child. and all the codes are written in such a way, if someone's a person or child or, so forth, then all sorts of things happen. So, for, I guess, a good example of a worst case is a woman who has inside of her a child that is a person, as opposed to a fetus or an early nurtured embryo, now has to compete with what she allowed to occur, which is her pregnancy. And then some may argue it's manslaughter if she tries to have an abortion. Now, some people say this is about Roe v. Wade. This is not Roe v. Wade. This is not about giving to the states what to do about abortions, because this is not about abortion. This is about redefining, using religious terms and beliefs and not medical science, what allows the greatest expanse of the evangelicals to stop, even arguably, the potentiality of life, encompassing from that point forward. So who's to say that it won't be, if we keep track of a woman's period, who's to say then we won't use that to go after a woman who doesn't have a period, suggesting she's pregnant? Do we then watch her to see what she's going to do about that possible, potential child? This is where we're going. This is a horrible place to go. And it's not just about the religious principle. The religious principle is a way to gain control over the body of a woman and the man in the family unit with that woman and the other children in that unit and the community and the nation, and to foster a bunch of beliefs that are bullshit, that are mythical. Now, I always enjoyed Campbell, who was a mythologist, I think would be the best way to describe it. And I think he was very unhappy when his brilliance pondered deeply upon his Roman Catholic upbringing, that it didn't hold up to what he understood about a symbol system. But I think it was so deeply ingrained, he couldn't shake it. And like many people who choose a way of life to help them understand something that happened in their own life, that's what I think was going on with him. And so his reconciliation of his disappointment in religion became, I think, his notion that a myth is something that helps you get through life. That if you believe it, it carries you through. And he was very careful not to step into a zone in which many more would react against him for his analysis of comparative religions the way he did, in symbol systems, going back from Native Americans into Egypt and to all over the globe. And his writing and storytelling ability was brilliant. So, in this case, he would even describe, once he was parking in Lower Manhattan, and a young boy had imagined himself a police officer who told him he couldn't park there. Now, instead of saying to the kid, "Move along, kid, I can park here," he allowed himself to participate in the child's myth. Now, was that a responsible thing to do? I don't know. But to a certain extent, the compromise seemed small, and it was enjoyable, I think, to Campbell to see someone and fulfill for himself at a young age this mythical belief system. So what we have is, we have this case in Alabama, which stands for the proposition that you can't have protection against this definition. The definition is the thing. The definition is the thing. That is, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a life, or are we dealing with a potentiality outside the body that by no stretch of medical science can be considered anything but a modern miracle to enable people who want to have children and have problems having a child, getting it by this manner. So, how are we going to deal with this? Well, impeachment comes to mind. Does it go to the Supreme Court with this group of people chosen by Trump? I certainly hope not. It is a real problem in the system. And it takes me back to my arguments going back when I talk about Sir Thomas More, and you probably remember it, so forgive me for my slight encapsulation of the notion. But the situation is that the person who doesn't respect the law, as is the case in Sir Thomas More's son-in-law, who said he would tear down all the laws because they threatened, he didn't say it this way, threatened his father-in-law for being Catholic and not taking an oath to support the king's religion. And he said, the son-in-law said, that he would take down all the laws to get at the devil. And Thomas More's encapsulated statement is along the lines of, sure, I know you would take down the laws. You'd take down all the laws, and they're not God's laws. There's men's law. And could you stand in the wind that would blow? That's where we are. We're going to see more of this unless we step up and stop it. What does that mean? Well, it means not changing the law in Alabama as to in vitro fertilization, but eliminating this definition that was pulled out of the air from Sir Thomas Aquinas and others. In other words, not civil law, not our Constitution, which prescribes against having a joinder of church and state, indeed argues for the alternative, a separation of church and state. So that's what's at risk there. Now, among the other peculiar things that are happening is we have the Teamsters, like they did with Nixon, are supporting Trump. Old alliances. And I don't know what the Teamsters expect out of it, but they don't just support someone. And I don't know how you join forces with someone who's against unions and get the respect of unions. But the Teamsters is a special case. You may have heard we had a moon landing yesterday, and this 14-foot high object is the first of several ventures by the United States using private firms, which I am against. And why should they get a profit on our nation's exploration? So in any case, private firms are doing it. And the success of the mission was that the lander landed upright, although the program and manner in which this was to accomplish didn't work. And so they had to improvise, which is one thing that the space program has been known for. Under difficult and changing circumstances, to have the science and insight and resolve and genius to make it work. Which is why at one time I wanted to be an astronaut. And it was one of the things that encouraged me to study physics and then engineering. Finally, we have, in my opinion, the last and very important question is, what are we doing about Zelensky? And Schumer is going there, hopefully, I think, to put pressure on others. But here we are, standing outside of the allies in NATO and not helping Ukraine beyond what we can do, as a Congress freezes our ability to save these people from tyrant Putin. We also have the peculiar situation in which America is against a peacefire. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of bric-a-brats and criticisms to go around. for how, well, certainly Hamas and Israel has conducted themselves. Killing, killing, killing. If there is not a ceasefire or a pause or whatever name you want to call it, how can we expect to come out of this with a solution? We are the only person in the UN, only entity rather in the UN, the only nation state in the UN, using our veto to kill the possibility of a ceasefire. Shame on us. And those who would be critical by the fact of disagreeing about how we progress cannot ignore the fact that Netanyahu has other competing interests that favor him following the course he does. And we're talking about the prosecution and his control of the government. And these cannot be ignored. And our help is sought, and we are conforming to the wishes of Netanyahu in the extreme, though they depend upon us to be of assistance. In any case, the Republicans are not being helpful on either of these scores, and in fact took off a vacation rather than address them. So that kind of meandering discussion is what I can think of is worth talking about today. There are plenty of other things, but I think these are at the top of the food chain. So it's good to be with you, and I hope to be out again tomorrow. And maybe it'll be even warmer. Well, that'd be cool. So I say goodbye to you and good day from my Cathedral of Trees. All the best. Bye-bye.